The intenders of the highest good are honored to bring you The Code. 10 Intentions for a Better World. We arrived in Ashland, Oregon, intending that we find the perfect place for our Intenders Roadshow. Right away, the Circle of Terran manifested for us. It was the ideal location for a very special group of Intenders to come together. From the moment we got there, we knew we were on sacred ground. It was unforgettable. Join us now as we take you with us on the road with The Code.
I'd like to tell you another story, if I might, that's one of my favorites, actually. And this story has to do with a great warrior general in a time on this earth, some 70,000 years ago, in a land almost forgotten that existed out in what is now called the Pacific Ocean. And this land was called Lemuria. It was the civilization that preceded a much better known civilization that was sunk under the waves that's called Atlantis. And in Lemuria, we had periods of time where we were extremely empowered, and that we were in telepathic communication with the dolphins, and the dolphins used to teach us. In fact, many of these teachings came from the dolphins, these teachings of empowerment. And toward the end of the Lemurian culture, when it was going through its death throes and its end times, very similar to what's going on planet Earth nowadays. Why? They were going through wars as well. And there was a war raging in a valley, 10,000 soldiers fighting, and the leader of the Lemurian army, a great warrior general. His name was Ching. And the valley floor was strewn with blood and bodies of fallen soldiers. And they had fought all day long in this valley, and the sun was beginning to set over the hillside. And Ching himself found himself in a sword-to-sword combat with a younger, stronger foe. A young man who was fighting with him for some 20-25 minutes to the limits of their endurance. And in the course of the fighting, the young man tripped over a fallen body. And as he tripped, he fell backwards onto his back, and his helmet flew off, and his sword flew from his hand, and he's laying on his back, and Ching stood over him, ready to run him through. But he took just a second to look him in the face, and he saw that this is just a boy of 19 or 20 years old who hadn't had the opportunity to even taste the fruits of life yet. And it stopped him for just a second longer to look into the young man's eyes. And in that instant, in looking into the young man's eyes, he saw a part of himself. And he knew that if he were to harm this young man, he would only be harming himself. Whereupon he set his sword aside and walked over to a little hillside where 10,000 soldiers that day watched as he bowed his head and asked God for forgiveness for what he had done. And a light began to come on, and he began to glow. And he began to actually ascend as he glowed, and hovered over to a place over this battlefield and settled down in front of the young man and embraced him, the man he had been fighting with earlier, hugged him and bid him to go back to his family and fiancée and live out the rest of his years in peace. Whereupon all 10,000 soldiers that day threw their swords aside and went back to their respective lands and homes and families to tell the story of the great warrior general who dispensed that which is termed mercy. Mercy. It's the one ingredient we've forgotten about nowadays. Mercy, it would solve all of our ills. Mercy is a true path unto peace, unto the peace we seek, if we would just dispense, just give mercy unto our fellow travelers. For indeed, who among us would deny it unto themselves? None. None. When faced with the point of the sword, each and every one of us would appreciate mercy. And yet we're so quick to deny it to our fellow men. I suggest unto you that the message that Ching left unto us that time, the message of mercy, needs to be re-examined and brought forth into this culture, into this time in history, and everything will get better.